Armenia and the Armenian Diaspora, which has entered into a new chapter following the Velvet Revolution. There is a renewed opportunity for growth and teamwork for the betterment of Armenia, Artsakh, and Homeland Diaspora adventures. This panel will discuss the needs, challenges, and opportunities for Homeland Diaspora relations in this new era. Our moderator today is Ara Khachadurian. For the past 27 years, Ara has served as the English editor of Asbarez newspaper. During his tenure, the English section transformed from a weekly insert in the Armenian section to a daily publication, now having a significantly large online foothold in the Armenian media reality. He also oversaw the creation of the newspaper's website in 1997, becoming the first Armenian publication to have an online presence. Currently, Asbarez is one of the widest read publications in the world. Before Asbarez, Khachadurian served as the Media Relations Director at ANC Western Region. Khachadurian was born in Iran and moved to the United States with his family in 1979. While on the East Coast, Khachadurian joined the AYF and the ARF. He served 2 terms on the AYF-YO-ARF Central Executive, one of them as chairman. Please welcome Ara Khachadurian.
Thank you, ANCA Western Region, for putting together this event and inviting me to take part in it. It was February 1988. I was a junior at Northeastern University in Boston. And one morning, I was a journalism major, so our requirement reading was the New York Times. So one morning when I was getting my coffee and my copy of the New York Times, below the fold of the front page, there was an article by Felicity Berenger reporting on massive demonstrations in a place called Stepanakert, Nagorno-Karabakh. My grandmothers, both of them, are Artsakhtsis, so I know what Stepanakert is, I know what Nagorno-Karabakh is, but for me to see it in print in the New York Times at a time that I was a student, where we had also learned about Armenia, Karabakh, Western Armenia, growing up as diasporans, both in Iran and in Boston, it was exhilarating, because finally, what we had been talking about in AYF meetings, what I've been hearing my grandmothers tell me at home, was right now front page news. And it also was the first window that the diaspora had to the homeland. It is unfortunate that a week later, that same publication would publish grisly photographs reminiscent of the ones we would see during the genocide of our people in Sumgait being massacred. We had no choice as diasporans, because we, as a diaspora, were created to serve our homeland. It was our first calling to roll up our sleeves, get to work, and make sure that our brothers and sisters in Karabakh not only were safe, but were able to freely articulate their right to self-determination. Fast forward to December of 1988, and we were no longer on the fold of the New York Times front page, but on the front of the front page because of the earthquake. And unfortunately, that tragedy, which brought all of us together instinctively. Nobody had to tell us, oh, let's get together and help Armenia. It was more like, what are we doing to help Armenia. And I'm sure all of you sitting here have vivid memories of those days, of how every single school, community center, every single Armenian church was filled with volunteers trying to help our brothers and sisters in the homeland. That was the door to the Soviet Armenia, and that was our door as diasporans to the homeland. Fast forward 30 years from then, happy to say that we just heard the Deputy Foreign Minister of Artsakh tell us how important it is for us to not just begin, but continue what we started in 1988, to make sure Artsakh is a flourishing republic, and to make sure that one day we will truly unite Artsakh with Armenia, that our vision of a united and independent Armenia will slowly become a reality. And we have a panel of experts today who are going to touch on this very critical issue facing our nation. It's not a homeland issue, it's not a diaspora issue, it's not an Artsakh issue, it's a national issue. Because at the end of the day, for me, what homeland and diaspora relations mean is that finally, all 10+ million of us that live around the world will together make our nation one of the greatest in the world by achieving what some of the young generation has been able to do in a very short time in making Armenia the so-called Silicon Valley of the region. And we're certainly represented here by Daron, who has an announcement to make. Let's have him make his announcement. Daron, go ahead. What's going to happen?
Hello.
What's outside?
So we will have 3 GG cars here today to facilitate rides. So instead of taking Uber or Lyft, so download GG, which is the first letter of the alphabet. Download, and we will take 3 people or more as a carpool to from here.
And while Uber is laying off 1,000 of its employees and not doing so well with its IPO, let's help a startup in Armenia, and let's all download Gigi and go to Glendale or wherever it is we're going from here via that app. Thank you, Daron. What is also significant, and what we're going to talk about, is how all of us came to be on this stage. One of the people that I'm very happy to call my personal friend is Zare Sinanyan, who not only for last year was the Glendale mayor, now he's the Armenia's High Commissioner for Diaspora Affairs, and we're very happy to have him here on this stage. Zare, welcome back to LA, but I'm sure you're looking forward to going back to Armenia. I also want to note that in the audience is Sarah Anjargolian, another of our community members, who is also the executive director of the High Commission for Diaspora Affairs. Am I right? Chief of Staff, sorry, my bad. Hi, Sarah. Antranik and I have worked together for the 30 years that I just mentioned. He was the editor of The Weekly while I was a new AYF member, and we would sit around the table at the Hydranic and talk about what is it that we can do to help Armenia. In his position at Tüfengen Foundation, I think he has found the way to help Armenia. And one of the key components of that organization, I'm going to let everyone talk about themselves. One of the key components of that organization is resettling and rebuilding villages and towns in the liberated territories of Artsakh. I was fortunate enough to witness one of those situations in 2017 when villagers in Arachamukh, which is in the southern part of Artsakh, received their houses. And an entire community that had started forming with its own school, with its own community center, was also completed. If I understand correctly, just this past summer they got a sports facility as well. You'll talk about more about your work. Thank you for being here, Antranik.
Thank you.
I heard about Dr. Nerses Kopalyan while the popular movement in Hayastan, also known as the Velvet Revolution, was happening through his writings at EVN. But it seems that he has also had a very long and storied past as far as Homeland Diaspora relations are concerned, and he's currently an advisor to the Office of the High Commissioner of Diaspora Affairs. This is a heavy High Commissioner presence here, so welcome. And I'm not going to murder his last name, but I'll try. I just met Daron outside. Daron Lizagub is the founding CEO of Gigi, which you're going to download the app and take your cars there. But what's more significant is that Daron is a diasporan who has decided to create and make that IT sector, that Silicon Valley component of Armenia, a reality. And he is among one of many people I have met and been impressed with who have taken our ingenuity as Armenians and have really translated not only into jobs for local Armenians, but also elevating Armenia's status in the world as innovators, which we all are, of course, but more importantly, competing in an industry worldwide and becoming successes. What I was also telling Daron is what the significance of the revolution was last year, more important than toppling a regime of criminals who looted the entire nation for 30 years, is that the new generation, the independence generation, those people who were born not knowing what the Soviet system is, it is their responsibility to move the significant issue of Homeland Diaspora relations forward with the understanding of exactly what the diaspora is, because the diaspora as a reality is a political reality. We are not just random people living outside of Armenia because we felt like it. We are people living outside of Armenia because our ancestors were forced out of our homelands. And if there are those out there who feel or are tired of talking about the Armenian Genocide, well, I feel really badly for all of them, because we would not be having this conversation about Homeland Diaspora relations had the genocide not happened. And the reason that there is a diaspora is because of the genocide. My grandfather and Ani Hovanesyan's grandparents are from the same village in Erzurum, Zitoh. They survived the genocide. That's why we're living in a diasporan community here in Los Angeles. However, we wake up every day looking at our homeland as where we need to be, where our resources need to be directed, and how we can make a better future for us as Armenians and the future Armenians who are going to populate that homeland. So I'm going to give the mic to Zare. You can introduce yourself and make a small presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Ara, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you briefly, and also want to thank my co-panelists for being here. I think you wanted us to shortly state how we found ourselves to be here. I mean, it depends on where we start, right? I could start with pre-genocide time, because truly how we all arrived here in this room, or brought in a broader sense in this place in life where we are, has a causational kind of chain of events that have taken place. And the pivotal moment in all of that was what happened to our people prior to the First World War, at the end of the 19th century, but most importantly, as a result of the genocide of the Armenian people. I, like many of you, come from a background that is heavily Western Armenian. 3 of my 4 grandparents are Western Armenian, albeit from different parts of that concept that is Western Armenia. One is, my dad was born in Bolis, my grandfather was born in Bardizak, an all-Armenian town very close to Bolis on the coast of the Sea of Marmara. My grandmother comes from Kesaria, but was born in Bolis. My other grandfather was born in Tallinn, but was a son of a Mushetsi refugee from the first massacres of 1890s. And my grandmother comes from a village called Merkashat in what is now Armavir region in Armenia, but is from Igdir. Her parents were from Igdir and fled during the genocide and during the Republican years when Turkey occupied that part of Eastern Armenia. So, in a broader sense, I come from where you started, which is a genocide, and at some point, my dad tells a funny joke. I'll share that joke with you. He says, twice in my life, I was transported to Armenia. I was repatriated, and both times no one really asked my opinion. And both times it was a guy named Zare Sinanyan. So in the beginning, it was my grandfather, who in 46 decided that he's going to live in his homeland. He was a bit of a communist, and that that was also a motivation for him. He really believed that communism was the way to go, and you should live in your homeland. Anyway, so my family found themselves in Yerevan, and of course, as of this June, my family and my dad finds himself to be a repatriant again because of Zare Sinanyan. So. The joke aside, of course, I lived in the States for over 31 years and just was an active person. I never sit still. I can't not participate in our communal affairs. I truly believe that what happens to my fellow Armenian happens to me, because history has proven that if you choose to be Armenian, if you take your Armenian identity seriously, then you are bearing not only the consequences of everything that happens to your people, but you also have the responsibility to make sure that those things happen the way you want them to happen and not the other way around. So at some point, I decided to cut it short, decided to run for office in Glendale, because that was, for me, a way to also serve my people and also serve a city that I liked very much, Glendale. And eventually, I always thought of moving to Armenia, but I'll tell you honestly, in about 2016, 2017, I gave up on that hope. I thought that our people had missed the historic moment and we were in terminal decline, and there was no way back for us. And of course, our people once again proved to be very wise, powerful people who overcame what seemed to be the insurmountable and were able to conduct a velvet revolution, as a result of which we have another chance. We again have a chance to build that homeland that we've all dreamt of, that can be a home for all of us and all of our children. And at that point I decided, okay, so now is the time to prove with action all the things that I've talked about in the past, and accepted the position of a High Commissioner of Diaspora Affairs, because I thought that that's a very important mission in order to, A, strengthen Armenia, make it powerful, and strengthen the diaspora. Because those two concepts are inalienably connected to one another. Without a powerful Republic of Armenia, I'll say Armenia because Republic of Armenia technically limits us to a certain territory, and our territory is much broader than that. I don't know about Medzhaik, but those territories that are today Armenia that we control, and I assure you we're not going to give up to anybody, no matter what. So that Armenia has to become powerful if we have any hope of keeping the diaspora from assimilation and dilution and disappearance. It's that simple. So in order for that to happen, a lot of things must change, a lot of reforms must take place. Armenia has to take some very certain steps, and at the end of the day, without mass repatriation, Armenia does not have a future, not even in the medium term. We are surrounded by certain neighbors that are very hostile to us. Their population is far larger than ours. We have fundamental national security issues that cannot be overcome unless you have a critical mass of population. And what we have in Armenia now is not that critical mass, I assure you, it is not. We need to bring our population up by a few million people in a relatively short period of time, and that's a very achievable goal, very achievable goal. If we run our country well, if we act cohesively and organized, we can achieve a critical mass of 5 million people by the year 2050. And I assure you, obviously, the mass repatriation is going to come numerically at the expense of the diaspora, but that is not going to weaken the diaspora at all. It's going to strengthen it. Just going back to the issue of whether, we talk about Artsakh and the Artsakh problem. The Artsakh conflict is not something that can be separated from our broader issues, our overall issue of national security and national survival. Artsakh is just one component of all of it. Our enemy, and we should call them an enemy because they see themselves as such, does not hide their ambition of declaring, they declare Yerevan as the capital of Western Azerbaijan. Their former, the current president does that. The former president was bragging about washing his legs in Lake Sevan. They have current and obviously stated ambitions of occupying all of Armenia. So negotiating this part of liberated territories or part of Artsakh and all that is just not an option for those reasons, because there's no end to their appetite. The only way we can deal with them is by having a strong, powerful state that can defend our interests in the one place that matters the most, and that's in the trenches. And the sooner we accept that, the easier we can deal with it. Again, that's not an insurmountable problem either. Fortunately, we're blessed with intellect, we're blessed with education, we're blessed with a diaspora that has unlimited resources. And I'm not talking about financial resources, I'm talking about, again, professional capabilities, intellectual capabilities, connections, soft power, projection power. I mean, all of that. All we need to do is figure out that medium, that formula through which we can fully deploy the strength of the diaspora for the benefit of Armenia, which will act in the end for the benefit of the diaspora. I think that's it for now.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Dr. Kasparian and ask him to tell us what are some of the aspects of the work that is being done at the Tufenkian Foundation? What are the challenges that he sees in that work, and what is his outlook toward advancing diaspora and Armenia relations?
Thank you, Ara. You know how to throw a curveball. I prepared my remarks in a different direction. All I can say is that my work with the Tufenkian Foundation has been very rewarding and continues to be very rewarding, because we truly believe that our goal ultimately is to enable Armenia's people and Artsak's people to develop their own capacity. Trying to help nudge along a different model for diasporan engagement. That is, as someone said earlier, not providing fish, but teaching people how to fish, or enabling people, giving them the resources to accomplish that which they should be able to accomplish. Having said that, I was told that I had 7 minutes, so I'm going to actually very briefly go through a few slides, if the folks back there have my slideshow. And if not, I'll just, okay, thank you. So I guess I press what? I press an arrow? Oh, there it is, okay. So what I thought I would do is quickly go over 6 points that I believe are very interesting and timely as we think about Homeland Diaspora relations today. I believe we are at a time now where things are rapidly changing, both in Homeland and Diaspora, and we have to grab hold of this transitional moment to make some changes in how we think about our goals, how we think about our priorities, and how we think about our assumptions. So I have 6 points in mind. Let me jump into them. I should say, of course, this is all prefaced by the fact that Armenia has undergone a massive transformation, which we call the Velvet Revolution, which involves now a rethinking, a reshaping of Armenia's governance and of Armenia's public culture. Included in that, I believe, is a reset of Homeland Diaspora relations. And hearing Zadeh Sinanyan talk, I'm even more confident that, in fact, this new regime has in mind a reset that will transform the way in which we relate to one another. So having said that, several points here. First, there is a prevailing mentality that I think has to be done away with. That prevailing mentality was born in the late 1980s when, in rapid-fire sequence, we experienced the Karabakh movement, the massive earthquake that rocked northwestern Armenia, the drive to independence, and then those difficult years post-independence. If you remember, the early 90s were the years of darkness, when there was no light, heat, power, and we would organize annual Operation Winter Rescues for Armenia. This created a certain reflex, a certain mentality in the diaspora where we viewed Armenia as a case, as an aid recipient. And often we thought in terms of what can we do for Armenia and its people? Armenia has to stop being viewed as a beneficiary. We have to view Armenia as a partner, where there's exchange, where there's much to be taught, but also much to be learned. And hopefully on the Armenia side of the equation as well, there's perhaps enhanced or revised thinking about the diaspora. I think many of you who are experienced will recall that in the 90s and even into the 2000s, many officials would come from Armenia seeking first and foremost material gain. They viewed the diaspora as a milking cow, and dollar signs went off in their eyes. That view of diaspora has to change, and again, hearing Zadeh Sinanyan talk, I'm confident of that when he says, as much as your money or even more than your money, your skills, your resources, your worldviews matter to us. That's what I think we need to hear and what we need to act on. Okay. I have 6 points. One was not enough. Okay, oops. Let's go to number 2. Okay, I must have changed the order of my slides. So let me just go with what I've got. Diaspora, we are permanent. There is no happily ever after. What do I mean by this? Look, the organized diaspora is largely a century old and dates to the genocide and Sovietization of Armenia. Most of us, our grandparents or great-grandparents, came here as refugees. They came here as exiles. And we built up a whole culture around exile, one of which is that, well, one day we're going to defeat the Turks, or one day the Soviet Empire is going to crumble, and we're all going to return to Armenia, and it will be happily ever after. Well, happily ever after is never going to come. Now, I think, with Armenia's independence and with greater and greater opportunity to interact with Armenia, we have to look at a different model. Imagine all of the diaspora repatriating to Armenia. I'm not against repatriation, on the contrary. But the diaspora is permanent and should be permanent because of all the contacts, resources, and linkages that it develops for us to sustain that small, tiny, vulnerable, landlocked country. And today, even in our conscious or subconscious thoughts, we still often think of the homeland as that place that we will all eventually return to. A few weeks ago, I was looking through the program of Dashnak Suchun of the ARF. To this day, the ARF's party program says our ultimate goal is Haya Havak, Hoga Havak, ingathering of Armenians on their ancestral lands. Well, I support the idea of repatriation, but having a permanent diaspora is no longer a liability, should no longer be viewed as an accident. It is an asset, it is a strength. Diaspora embrace the diversity. What do I mean by this? I guess I mean several things. First of all, in 100 years, the diaspora has grown extensively. Today, the bedrock of the diaspora may still be genocide survivors and their descendants. But you have now a lot of people, especially in the post-Soviet world, that have come to the Ukraine or to Russia or to other countries as economic migrants, not necessarily fleeing genocide. In addition, our diasporan communities have become more diverse in other ways. It used to be, I think up until maybe a generation ago, that our diasporan communities were largely organized around traditional patriotic organizations, whether that is Tashnag Ramgavar, Prelacy, Diocese, AGBU, ARS, with a number of organizations sprinkled in between. In the last 25 years, we've seen a proliferation of organizations that are tied to professional background, the Armenian Bar Association, the Armenian Medical Association, many other groups that often are more pragmatic, more focused in their attention, who have no partisan affiliation or no tie to the traditional diaspora, but who often have a lot to bring to the table and a lot of value. I also think that there are many people, what I would call, quote-unquote, Gorsavads Armenians, lost Armenians, that are being born again now under the influence of the new Armenia. I cannot count the number of people who, by traditional standards, are not literate as Armenians. They don't speak Armenian, they don't belong to any organization, but somewhere, somehow they feel Armenian. They go to Hayastan, they get engaged through Birthright Armenia or an AYF internship program or some local exchange program, and they come back born again. We need to widen our lens and widen our purview because the diaspora is more diverse than we ever imagined it to be. Okay, let's see. Okay, this is a bit provocative. I say discard Haya Bahbanum, Haya Bahbanum being Armeno-preservation. Maybe not discard it, but certainly radically revise it. Haya Bahbanum has been the reigning paradigm of our diasporan cultural life for the last 100 years. And it's understandably so. You know, when our ancestors came to this country, mostly genocide survivors, they had very little other than the clothes on their back. They had lost their families in many cases. They had lost their ancestral lands and properties. What did they have to hold on to? They had their identity to hold on to. Language, culture, tradition. These things became prized and they became held up as core values. Հայերեն խոսիր, ինչու մամա, որտև կարևոր է. Speak Armenian. Why? Because it's important. These cultural aspects of literacy became outsized, became swollen in importance because we were living in exile. Today, I think the Haya Bahpanun paradigm has to be radically revised. Why? Because often identity in diaspora was almost a rehearsal. It was almost a catechism that had to be sung, whether it was through commemorations or through literature or through language or knowing your history. It was almost viewed as a national duty. I think today, rather than aspiring to be good Armenians, which is what I was brought up to be a good Armenian, we need to think more in terms of effective Armenians rather than good Armenians. I can think of many people that have done enormous work on behalf of Armenia and Artsakh who don't speak a word of Armenian. Okay? I'm not justifying that or valorizing that, but it's a fact. We need everybody, and we need everybody regardless of their literacy according to the prior standards. Armenia, source of identity for diaspora. For, again, several generations, we have sought identity through our local institutions, through schools, through scouts, through youth programs. Okay? All those things have played an important role for us, and they should continue to play an important role. But today, I think we need to acknowledge that probably the most important source of identity and Armenianness should be coming from Armenia. We worry about people being lost through intermarriage, through drifting away from the community. Hayastan, through certain forms of engagement, is probably the best way to give that booster shot, to give that energy boost to diasporan Armenians so that they can come back and practice their identity in meaningful ways, in a vibrant way. So again, I think Armenia shouldn't be viewed as a distraction from our core functions here. It should be viewed as a crucial enrichment towards the things that we need to do here. And one is, it is a prime source of bolstering our identity as Armenians. And finally, and I guess this is for everyone, and it's a more difficult topic, which is rootedness versus circuitry. It's not where you are, it's where you're going. I think of Professor Khachik Tololyan's remarks that really the Armenians are not so much a nation as they are a transnation. That's not just fancy wordplay. I think there's something there, which is that the Armenians have really a competitive advantage over many other nations in that we have a homeland. Granted, we've lost Western Armenia, but today we have a Republic of Armenia and Artsakh that are our homeland. But at the same time, we are connected through this vast network, vast circuitry of communities found around the world. And in an era of globalization, that is a trump card. That is an advantage for us. And I think we need to think more and more in terms of circuitry. It's not so much as important where you are, New York, LA, Moscow, Yerevan, but where you are going. That is, you may be a resident of California, but through investments or through job creation or through cultural exchanges, you're playing a role in Hayastan. So it's where you're going and what you're connected to that matters as much, if not more, than where you reside. So I think, yeah, that's about it. These are designed to jog your thoughts and jumpstart discussion, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anto. I'm going to go to Dr. Kopalyan and have him make his statements.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. A couple of general areas I want to discuss as a political scientist that is very relevant to Armenia's relations with the diaspora's influence and ability to apply its resources to advance the broader goals of Armenia, and within that context, kind of look at some nuanced issues that shape both diaspora identity, the concept of Armenianness, and how Artsakh fits into this broader discourse. So, as it was mentioned on this panel, the Velvet Revolution that took place in Armenia changed a great deal. It changed the way the diaspora views Armenia, and also changed to a large extent how the Armenian citizen views the diaspora. But one of the things to consider is that for the longest time, Armenians in Armenia, citizens of the Republic of Armenia, and diasporan Armenians, we actually have two different cultures. Okay? Sometimes they overlap, but a lot of times they are separate. Most of us are not aware of this. We don't pay attention to it. We take it for granted. But there's a very, very interesting dynamic here that needs to be kind of looked at. Diasporan Armenians are exceptionally nationalistic. Okay, we take our identity extremely importantly, and we're borderline obsessed with our Armenian identity and sort of ascertaining historical justice and achieving set goals. So we are immensely nationalistic. But what we're not, to some extent, is patriotic. Okay, and patriotism stipulates a certain devotion to the state of Armenia, Republic of Armenia. So diasporan Armenians usually conflate their nationalism with their patriotism. Okay, we take great pride in our Armenian identity, but for a lot of diasporan Armenians, the Republic of Armenia is sort of a distant reality. And one of the things that we need to understand is that this needs to be realigned. Okay, the diasporan Armenian, aside from being nationalistic, also has to become patriotic. If you simply love your Armenian identity, but you're not in tune, you're not involved, what as Antonik brought up, you're not an effective Armenian, that's going to limit the effectiveness of how the broader Armenian world addresses the problems that we face. This is kind of tied into pretty much all the issues that we're talking about here. Okay. Can Armenia achieve the goals that are set out, whether it deals with repatriation, whether it deals with security in Artsakh, whether it deals with issues of mobilizing diaspora resources? Okay, this is an extraordinarily complex situation that's going to require a lot of strategic astuteness, both from the diaspora and Armenia itself. I have done a lot of research in Armenia. I've basically been involved in observing political developments in Armenia after the Velvet Revolution. Prior to that, I've done a lot of work with the Armenian State Ministry of Defense, and have been involved in sort of security studies. And what my research has shown me is that when we talk about the security of Artsakh, for example, right, it brings up this important issue that most diasporans view Artsakh through the lens of reclaiming the glories of the past, reclaiming Western Armenia, or Artsakh is not, but that's part of the dynamic, right? It fits into this very powerful narrative of culturalism and cultural heroism. Extremely important, okay? But when we talk about concrete developments in Artsakh, or concrete assistance to straighten the Artsakh army, or Artsakh army, how it's intertwined with Armenia's army, and sort of advancing those interests, this disconnect between nationalism and concrete patriotism is something that's to be realigned. So, for example, obviously Armenia has serious geopolitical problems, okay? We all know we're not in a friendly neighborhood. Okay, as Zara brought up, Azerbaijan is very irredentist. It makes continuous aggressive claims against Armenia, so on and so forth. Okay, one of the things that we realized is that Armenia's military, for example, how being one of the more efficient militaries in the region, is not the most powerful military when it comes to military technological advances and technological resources. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, but this is a small aspect of the discussion. The broader issue is having the diaspora involved in research and development in Armenia. Okay, there has been extraordinary advancements in the IT sector, but the broader security protocol of Armenia is going to require a transition from IT research and development to research and development that supports a strengthening military. So resource mobilization from the diaspora to Armenia is not simply exclusive to economics or culture. This could exponentially also support military developments in Armenia as well. And by military developments, we're talking about self-defense and security. Okay, that's what we're primarily talking about. So we have interesting ideational developments since the Velvet Revolution, the whole nationalism versus patriotism, and attempting to align those. We also have interesting developments with respect to Artsakh security and the role of the diaspora in playing an important role. And then we have another issue that's sort of the elephant in the room. The Velvet Revolution happened. Is Armenia consolidating its democracy? Okay. We all support the Velvet Revolution to some extent, right? But the broader question is it achieving its set goal? Is Armenia democratizing? And one of the most important aspects, and this is a project that I've also been involved in, is strengthening Armenia's institutions. Okay. If we want to see Armenia democratize, if we want to see the Velvet Revolution consolidated, Armenia needs to undertake important institutional reforms. And it is taking those institutional reforms, okay? But in the broader scope of things, it needs the diaspora's help. And by help, again, we don't mean sort of holding our hands out and requesting assistance, but rather human capital, expertise in broad range of areas that could actually expedite the reform process, okay? Whether the expertise pertain to technical knowledge, or whether it's broad experience in other parts of the diaspora or other countries that are diaspora and repatriates are going to be able to contribute to, or in essence contributing to democratic consolidation. So this broader project of Armenia that we talk about, right, this little republic that was born after 1991 and is trying to sort of reascertain all that it has lost, both externally and domestically, all of these are aligned between diasporan interests and Armenian interests. Fundamentally, one cannot happen without the other. Okay? So overarchingly, we always have to consider that it's not just material resources, it's not just ideational resources, it's not just security resources. All these are collectively aligned with one another in order for Armenia to succeed as a republic. Those are my general comments.
Those are very interesting points and a lot of food for thought for our conversation. I'm going to ask your colleagues, Daron, to give a little bit of an introduction, if he may.
Hello. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome, and thank you, NCA, for the very heartfelt welcome. I joined GG this year, and GG is the ride-hailing leader in Armenia. We operate in Georgia, Russia, and we'll be operating here in the U.S. Why it's important for us to come here is because we wanted to break that idiom that companies born in Armenia can come here and play in the Premier Leagues, play and win. We want to break that idea that it's not like we don't like when Microsoft opens an office in Armenia, we get happy. Like Microsoft's there, like creating new jobs. But we want to switch that around to where anything born in Armenia can come out of Armenia, and with that create this new bridge that ties to the diaspora in a reverse way, where other companies will follow. So we don't want Armenia to become a outsourcing workhorse where everyone's using our brain to do some kind of a project that's not related to us. We want to create from Armenia and outsource to the rest of the world. So why I joined GG is because for this reason. Before that, I was doing I was creating virtual reality headsets made in Glendale. Most of the mobile VR headsets were made by Armenian hands. But the reason I joined is specifically for this reason, to re-bridge the bridge in a reverse way. So for GG to be kind of this network creator where you can, as an umbrella, to create that IT high energy community in Glendale and then LA. So it's very, very important for, I lost my train of thought. Yeah. So, sorry guys. Let me think. Yeah, so GG's secret weapon against players here is you guys. Other companies don't have a cultural glue like this. It's every single one of us. And as like the genocide was a bad thing, I look at it as what happens to the after effects of it, right? I look at it as like an asteroid hit our nation, split us apart, kind of like the asteroid that destroyed the dinosaurs. But from that, we are reborn, and we are reborn as all of us are like little suns. And then the sun does a lot of work to be a sun and shine. And like, there's a lot of asteroids in the solar system that are just asteroids. They're after effects not doing anything. But it's important for all of us to use that little sun in us to shine brighter, to be you as an Armenian, and then use that strength of the diaspora to connect to be the collection of bigger suns. And GG's, we want to do this to create those bridges, to foster creation. I'll keep it short so we can discuss more panel.
Thank you. Dr. Kopalyan, in your presentation, you brought up something that has been an issue that I am trying to grapple with. Since Armenia's independence, the successive regimes, as Anto put, looked at the diaspora as the entity that is going to just simply provide. But what you also talked about, Dr. Kopalyan, was the cultural divide that exists between diasporans and those living in Armenia. The fact that, perhaps due to some of the critical issues facing Armenia and our nation, we have not taken the time to kind of work through the divide. And during the Serge Sarkisian years, certainly it was not beneficial to have an emblem, if not a vestige, of the Communist Party be the face of Armenia diaspora relations, because that took us back further. But now that we have a government that is willing to recalibrate this thing, how do we go about addressing this divide and really making us here understand the psyche, the culture, and everything about the Armenians in Armenia, and what do we do with those living in Armenia for them to understand what is the diaspora? And I'm going to start this question with Zare and move along the panel, whoever wants to answer.
So, it has to start with a sincere effort on both parts to get to know each other. I mean, literally get to understand each other. And I'll take the responsibility for it and say that Armenia has to take lead on it, because Armenia is a physical place and has a government of its own. It can conduct policy, it can deal with that diaspora that's spread out throughout the world. That's something that diaspora can't do in a uniform manner. I mean, diasporan communities or diasporan, the countries where the diaspora exists have a more difficult time doing things in a systemic manner, because they're not represented by a state. They don't have organizations that speak for all of them. One thing that my colleagues didn't explicitly point out was the Russian diaspora. We talked about traditional diaspora, its structure, how it's changed and all that. You know, we have a diaspora, a group of people residing in a country, in a single country. That the number varies, no one quite knows, but varies somewhere for certain between 2 and 3 million. That's almost the size of the population of Armenia. And this diaspora, for example, is largely a big mystery for not only Armenia, but it's a mystery for the rest of the diaspora because it's very complicated. It's old in many ways. It's much older than the rest of the diaspora because some of the diaspora stems from the times of Catherine the Great, or even before then, Crimean Armenians that were eventually repopulated by Catherine. And then there's a huge group that came post-collapse of Soviet Union. They don't have the traditional diasporan structures that we do in the West. They often speak very different dialects. For example, the folks in the Sochi, Adler area speak Hamshitsma or Hamshinli, whatever you call it, and so on and so forth. So getting to know each one of these individual groups and individual diasporas by Armenia is a starting point for two purposes. One is to really understand the diaspora who we're dealing with. The second is to develop policies with which we can deal with the diasporas, because again, to deal with the Moscow diaspora, I assure you, is fundamentally different than dealing with the people who live in Krasnodar or Rostov. These are people in the same country. I'm not even talking about how different the communities are from Australia all the way to, apparently there's a community in Singapore too. But through more interaction, through more working relationships between diaspora and Armenia, I think much can be achieved. But fundamentally in Armenia, I believe, it's my strong belief that we have to have, as part of the school curriculum, the subject of the diaspora. We need to teach our kids who their brethren and their sisters are in the diaspora, how they came about, how they live. And the purpose of that is not only sort of a scientific exercise, but to get them to love their people who live outside of Armenia. Because again, for selfish reasons for Armenia, on this issue of repatriation, no one's suggesting that every diasporan is going to repatriate. But unequivocally, a large part of the diaspora has to repatriate in order for Armenia to survive. And in order for that to happen, not only does legislative change have to take place, not only there has to be measurable improvement in healthcare, education, and of course the economy, but you have to have a society that's ready for this type of repatriation. We've had waves of repatriation since the Second Republic, in 1920 when the communists took over Armenia. And the first wave was relatively painless just because Armenia was so sparsely populated and because Armenia needed people to come and make it a place, make it a republic, which they did successfully in the 20s and 30s. But then the repatriation of the 40s was a failure in many ways. It was a success in a strategic sense, but it was a tragedy on an individual basis because folks who came there didn't quite know where they were going. A lot of misrepresentations were made. Armenia simply wasn't ready. It's not that Armenians who lived in Armenia were bad people and didn't want people coming there. It's just Armenia wasn't ready. It was a post-World War II, extremely poor, extremely hungry place that could not absorb 140, 150,000 repatriates from the diaspora. And no one had explained to them who's coming and why they're coming and why they should be welcomed. We need to learn those lessons and do it much better when we get to that point. But before that happens, as my colleagues stated, and I try to communicate, we need qualitative and not so much quantitative repatriation, which is folks with professional skills, folks with resources. They don't have to be financial resources, just people that can make a difference in Armenia. And by the way, the number of those people doesn't have to be huge. The latest example of how a relatively small number of people can make a cultural change are the Syrian Armenians who found themselves in the homeland. Many left, unfortunately, to other countries, to third countries, but many remained. And those that remained have made a cultural change in some spheres. For example, the culinary sphere, in the services sphere, things have changed completely in Armenia because the Syrian Armenians brought the culture of good service. Simple thing. And Armenia is so much a much more pleasant place today to visit because of that. Anyway, you know, half jokingly, but it's true. It's a fact. 10,000, 13,000 people have made a cultural change in Armenia. Imagine what 50, 100, 200 can do. If people come in with a sense of respect for law, you know, simple things like driving ethics, respecting pedestrians, you know, things like that, and multiply that by 1,000. Cultural change will be immense in Armenia, and that will have a chain reaction in every aspect of Armenian life.
Thank you, Dr. Kopalyan.
To address the sort of the why there's a split, if you will, between diaspora's culture and culture in Armenia, we have two different realities, right? The reality of life in the United States, for example, the reality of life in Canada, or for that matter in Russia, is quite different than the reality of life in Armenia. And so your reality creates a separate subculture where you value things a little differently, but most importantly, what differentiates the diaspora culture from the culture in Armenia is priorities, right? The Republic of Armenia obviously has to prioritize survival. That is the fundamental issue that shapes behavior. Diaspora's priorities are a little different, right? Diaspora's culture is more aligned with genocide recognition, maintaining Armenian identity, so on and so forth. So both obviously are extraordinarily noble, but they're not the same. So the disconnect in priorities plays a very important difference in explaining why we have separate cultures. Now, how could we change that? Right? How could we alleviate that divide? It's very simple, okay? It's simple to say, difficult to do exposure. Okay, the more a diasporan is exposed to the political realities or the lively realities in Armenia, they become better acclimated to that culture. Similarly, the more an Armenian citizen is exposed to the lifestyle in the diaspora, they better understand why the diasporan has the values that it has. Okay, so we have two separate realities that have developed initially in the first 70, 80 years, and then more intensely in the last 30, 40 years. Post-Soviet Armenia, for example, is a very different society than Soviet Armenia. Okay, cultural values are different, mores are different, and every culture in of itself evolves in a certain way. And this cultural evolution has pretty much created a rift between how a diasporan views its priorities as an Armenian and how an Armenian citizen in the Republic of Armenia view their priorities. So this connect obviously could be bridged through more exposure and better understanding of these things. And so, you know, and Zari touched up on this, you know, an Armenian in Armenia wouldn't understand, for example, if we need assistance to develop, you know, Program X, why isn't the diaspora pouring money into it? Hypothetically speaking, right? Why are they spending so much on, hypothetically, on lobbying in DC? Okay? Because for this diasporan citizen, their priority is improving livelihood through Project X. Whereas the diasporan Armenian's position would be, no, I have to utilize all these resources to advance the diaspora's interest in DC or whatever because we have separate priorities here, right? Diaspora is not simply a term. It's a lifestyle, it's a culture, it's a value system. It's its own reality. So unless sort of, you know, the reality of Armenia and the reality of the diaspora become aligned, it's going to take some time for these cultures to connect. And to kind of touch up on Zari's point, we don't have a monolithic diaspora. Okay? The diasporan culture in the United States is very different from diasporan culture in Latin America. Okay? You know, I've met a lot of people think the diasporan Armenians in France. They're just different. I'm not going to say good or bad, a little annoying, but, you know, different. Okay? And in that
Which
context...
one's annoying, Doctor?
Just being sarcastic. Or even in the U.S. we get that, like West Coast Armenian diasporans, Pretty cool. East Coast, I don't know, man. I'm not about that Boston lifestyle. But, so, you know, you do see these disconnects, okay? And so diaspora itself is not monolithic. And so when we have a bunch of subcultures, there's obviously a lot of disconnect on what constitutes our values. But in due time, a lot of this exposure would create a strong alignment. But the underlying base of that alignment has to be Armenia. Because what will constitute in the future Armenianness will be Armenia. Because it is the only independent realm where it self-reproduces Armenianness outside of anything else. It is the only sovereign entity that we have that is intrinsically Armenian. So in the end, it's all going to come down to that anyway.
Anto, I think he threw that at you. You need to defend the East Coast a little bit.
Are you goading me into a reaction? I don't have too much to add. I think we're on the same page here. Obviously, 70 years elapsed between the onset of Sovietization and the collapse of the Soviet Union. 70 years is 2 generations. Putting Humpty Dumpty back together again is going to take a while, and the only way is through ongoing engagement and slow but steady programs that link us up in working ways, not just through slogans like one nation, one homeland, one nation, one struggle, but actual working programs.
Darun, you brought up an interesting issue by calling it reversing the bridge. I want to make the bridge actually a two-way street. How do you feel about bringing this product that was created and made in Armenia and bringing it into a country that has an Uber or a Lyft or whatnot? What would compel someone to abandon those and get on Gigi?
Thank you.
For example.
Yeah. To add actually one thing on what Zara was saying, like the little things help. Like the current government doing Nourish. Nourish is this program that funds startups from outside of Armenia and helps repatriate them back to Armenia. And I've had two, three families actually move their business from here and move back to Armenia. And this is those little things that help. So, like, this was a little car on the bridge. But to answer what you're saying, Ara, is first we have this cultural glue where Uber and Lyft don't. So they are very carnivorous organisms, and Gigi isn't. It's born out of love, and that's going to play a lot of role in bringing it here. But to expand a little more, it's usually, if you look at a history of product, it's usually the third or fourth iteration of a product that becomes the market leader. So if we look at your browser, right? First iteration was Netscape and then Internet Explorer. The winner was Chrome by Google. It was the third iteration. Search engine. First was Altcode, and then Yahoo, and some other search engines after that. But it was the third or fourth iteration by Google that brought the product to a much more to its core form. So with Gigi, we have this advantage where Uber and Lyft have already opened the market and exposed everything that you shouldn't do with it, and have now gone very far away from its core. They become very corporate. So that love of the simple product is not there. So with Gigi, we have that advantage where we can completely learn from their mistakes. And initially, we would be starting with a product called GG Shuttle, which is, we have it operating in Armenia, connecting cities, like Yerevan to Gyumri. So we would be introducing that product here from Los Angeles to San Francisco, inner city. We're thinking having some in going around the city where you can hop in and hop out. So we would have a entry point with a different product.
Thank you. You would have to also fight the traffic, because sometimes getting to from the valley to Glendale takes as long as from getting from Yerevan
it's worse
to Stepanakert.
It's worse
on the long route.
But if it's done with love,
it's important.
Zare, I want you to touch on the Nourish program, because it seems that it's something that Daron has taken advantage of, and I believe there's a deadline looming. So if you want to talk about that.
So yes, thank you. I'm going to shamelessly plug Nourish since Daron opened the door. The Nourish program, which Daron was a participant, competitor in last year, is on this year again, and we, along with the Ministry of IT Technologies, are conducting Nourish program. And the competition, the request for proposals or request for applications is open for another 2 days?
Yeah,
two more days. Yeah. So if you know anyone who has a startup, an idea for a startup, and is willing to implement that idea in Armenia, and thinks their idea is good enough to win or be one of the winners of the competition, have them apply ASAP, because again, 2 days left. The reward package, or the winning package, includes everything from cash to support for those startups. We've engaged a multitude of partners that are significantly active and powerful in that field to basically provide an incubator for the startup to succeed. So again, please let anyone who's interested know. I wanted to touch upon this, go back on the issue of the disconnect between Armenian diaspora, and to add another layer to it, I think we have also a strategic disconnect. So what the diaspora sees as its sort of ultimate goals, and what Armenia sees may be a little different. And it may be a matter of history, etymology, and also where they are, and not really clearly seeing the picture. So I'll present my view of it. I think our end goal is and has to be being able to live on our ancestral homeland and retain our culture, rule ourselves. In essence, have a state that is located in our historic homeland, because that's the only guarantee that we can live as Armenians in perpetuity. That's what states are for. For the diaspora, sometimes when you deal with the diaspora, especially Western diaspora, for example, issues like genocide recognition appear to be the ultimate goal. It can't be an ultimate goal. It's just one tactical step towards a broader goal, which is us being able to live as Armenians, if we so choose, in our homeland. That has to be the strategic goal. So we need to talk more, we need to explain to each other why one is right and why the other isn't. Otherwise, again, it leads to mismanagement of our resources. And also, it can lead to some bad consequences. For example, if one tactical goal that appeared to be strategic is attained, does that mean that's it? There's nothing else? No, the goal that we have is eternal, hopefully, as long as humanity and planet Earth can sustain life. We want to remain Armenians, we want to retain our culture, and we want to do it in our own way, in our own homeland. That has to be the strategic goal. Everything else is relative. And I think to tie into that issue, I also hear in diaspora a lot, when they refer to Armenia, they always say, Armenian Artsakh, Armenian Artsakh. Folks, Artsakh is Armenia. Every time you say that, you're creating another dividing line amongst our people. Artsakh is an inalienable part of Armenia. Our prime minister, when he was in Stepanakert during this summer, I think 8 times he said, Artsakha Hayastane yev verch. And how much more clearly can we state this? We started this whole Qarabağ movement, our people started it, with the goal of reunification. Yes, there are administrative divides, but you will understand that the budget for Artsakh is provided from Yerevan. You understand that boys from all over Armenia are drafted and serve in Artsakh. So have full realization of that. Realize that we are one people. We happen to control territory that we call our homeland. And then there's the diaspora. That's it.
Ara?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I?
Yes.
I mean, until now, I think we've been lovey-dovey, so I'm gonna push you a little bit. I can't argue explicitly with anything you've said, Zada, except that, in my view, it's not either or, it's and. We have to do everything in our power for the Armenia that we have, while not forgetting about the Armenia that we've lost. And who better to address the Armenia that we've lost than the diaspora, whose, frankly, pedigree hails from Western Armenia. It's a heavy burden, I realize, and perhaps we should say that Armenia is the first among equals, because as Simon Marakian said, right, you don't want to be talking in the past tense about Armenia, the way we talk about the past tense regarding Western Armenia. But nevertheless, somebody's got to bear that burden too.
If I may respond, I agree with the first premise, and I vociferously disagree with the second. Of course, it's not either or, it's both, and things like genocide recognition are mutual goal. I mean, this is a national goal that we must pursue. In my view, it's more a national security issue, and then, for example, if Turkey recognizes it, admits to it, and says, oh, we're sorry, that for me means nothing. I mean, there has to be so much more that comes afterwards. But what comes afterwards, only one entity can implement policy and politics, an entity that is, it has to be the state. There's only one Armenian state, it's the Republic of Armenia. What happens vis-a-vis Turkey, I assure you, in the future is going to be with respect to Armenia, not with respect to the diaspora. You know, we always, especially during the 100th anniversary of the genocide commemoration, we had this motto, and we kept saying, Turkey failed. Turkey failed. I'm a lawyer, Turkey failed. I'm a successful businessman, Turkey failed. Folks, Turkey has not failed. Turkey never said, don't be a successful lawyer or a good, wealthy businessman. They're okay with it so long as you're not a successful businessman and a successful lawyer in Armenia. They want you can be whatever you want, so long as you don't reside in what is our homeland. And that part of the homeland, Western Armenia, and a big chunk of Eastern Armenia that Turkey occupies. So Turkey hasn't failed as long as that's the status quo. And when we say, you know, the diaspora is going, you know, diaspora wants to struggle for Western Armenia, of course. But on its own, what is that struggle going to take place? How is the diaspora going to return, for example, Western Armenia? If you can give me an answer on that issue, I would love to hear it. But there is a state of Armenia that has all the institutions that a sovereign state has. It also conducts foreign policy. And that's a much more powerful tool.
If I could jump into the conversation. So precisely the point that we're getting at is, unless both interests are aligned, none of it's going to become a reality. What the diaspora wants, it cannot operationalize and execute without the state of Armenia. Right? At the same time, it's not that the Republic of Armenia is indifferent to the demands of the diaspora, but in reality, this is not something that it could implement. So obviously, if our priorities are aligned, then there's a higher probability of ascertaining some of these goals. But overarchingly, when we talk about attaining the objectives of what the diaspora wants, reclaiming Western Armenia or sustaining the narrative of Western Armenia as being part of broader Armenia, so on and so forth. These are crucial in shaping cultural discourse and controlling the narrative. But when we look at geopolitics, this is basically outside of the discourse. Turkey doesn't take these kind of conversations seriously. Turkey views the diaspora as a nuisance, sort of a headache, a problem that we create for them. But at the end of the day, they have the 8th most powerful army in the world. They really don't have to care about much of what we say when we look at the geopolitical reality. So instead of discussing the and/or dichotomy, we could just collapse those into a singular sort of aligned discourse where the interests of the diaspora are aligned with the interests of the Republic of Armenia. And then when that happens, the ideational goals of the diaspora could potentially be implemented by the actual substantive capabilities, instruments of the Republic of Armenia. But until then, if we're basically talking about two different things, right, or we're talking about two different priorities, we're going to spend so much more resources trying to work on things together as opposed to consistently working on everything together.
So you want to, how do you make a single unified voice?
So it's not a single unified voice. It's developing strategic infrastructure that works both with what the interests of the diaspora are, the organizations we have here, the views and demands of the diaspora and Armenians, and basically aligning this with the objectives of the Republic of Armenia. We don't have mechanisms or an infrastructure that could align that. It's not a subject that has ever come up and I will be the one to blame the Republic of Armenia for this, because the previous regimes never cared about aligning anything with the diaspora. Yeah. Right? The policy of the previous regimes was, please send me some money, but do not dare get involved with politics, okay, right? Do not dare stick your nose into anything else. So obviously there could not have been any alignment, okay? But now, when talking about the democratization of Armenia, we're not just talking about the civil rights of the Armenian citizen. We're also talking about democratizing the voice of the diaspora within Armenia, okay? So that is part of the broader discourse at hand.
One of the things that I kind of want to jump into this discussion as the moderator, just now in the last 2 minutes, some of our national aspirations became the purview of the diaspora. The diaspora, for example, as an institution, does not want genocide recognition to fulfill its own some kind of, objective, and then translate that into some kind of a national thing. What I meant earlier about this diaspora Homeland Armenia divide is precisely that. For example, when you go to the Armenian Genocide Museum at Dzizernagapert and you look at the exhibit that discusses the history of the genocide, all of a sudden it ends. It ends at a certain day or time or year. So the foreign visitor or visitors that flock to this place as a place of remembrance and also as a place of education feel like that the genocide ended, I don't know if it's 1923 or 1918, whatever the date is, and then nothing happened. Well, it did happen. The genocide component continued into the diaspora. Yes, those people who were left as a result of the independent republic in which the diaspora had a role to win, they stayed and became Soviet Armenia. The divide that was created within the Soviet Armenia continues today, and my hope is that that divide is going to be coming together, not by a didactic on a wall at the Genocide Museum, but for every Armenian to understand that, yes, it is important to strengthen Armenia's economy. It is important to ensure that self-determination and independence of Artsakh is recognized. It is important to make Armenia a strong country, but also do it with the national aspiration that by recognizing the genocide, it's not a simple, oh, I'm sorry, because recognition of the genocide brings forth other things that are also part of the national aspiration of all of us here. I don't think anyone here, sitting here or in Armenia or elsewhere, is going to argue that no, they don't want, the recognition of genocide over, strengthening the economy of Armenia. I think what we have today, and we have to take responsibility and take the opportunity, we finally have a government who cares about the diaspora in a way that it should. And we should take that opportunity to, yes, address how we can create an environment where by 2050 there'll be 5 million Armenians living in Armenia, but at the same time also discuss, does the person living in Yerevan or Dilijan or Goris or Stepanakert have a responsibility in advancing the issue of the recognition of the Armenian genocide? And my answer to that is absolutely yes. But when we talk about the recognition of the genocide as a diasporan issue, we immediately deepen that divide and not bring it into the national discourse and discussion. Go to a 21-year-old person living in Armenia and ask them, A, their knowledge of what our history is, and I'm not trying to call anyone bad educated or better educated, and ask a diasporan Armenian about their knowledge of what the Armenian history is, the current history of Armenia, the Soviet issues that they had to deal with, and there's the void there. When I'm saying we need to bring that divide together, it's for the totality of it, not simply cultural differences that exist, which exist in all of us because we all come from different backgrounds, but how can we bring all of these national issues that are equal importance together? How can we bring it together? And I think this type of a discussion is an important first step. It's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day, but instead of those shows that the previous diaspora ministry used to do where thousands of people would gather at Garin Demirjan Stadium and talk about we don't know what, but it was called the Diaspora Armenia Conference, we need to recalibrate those things and actually talk about the issues, because some of the things that all of you brought up, I don't agree with as Ara Khachadarian and also as the editor of the largest Armenian newspaper in the diaspora. And there might be things that I said that none of you agree with, but we need to sit around the table. We need to have this conversation, because if this entire agenda needs to happen, it's our agenda. It's not Zare's, it's not yours, it's not yours. It's our agenda, and we need to start the discussion and stop saying this is a diaspora issue, this is a homeland issue. We're not like passing around whose issue this is. It's all our issue, and we have to do this collectively. Whether we're going to do it or this generation that is creating a two-way bridge between the homeland and diaspora is going to do it, that's left up to all of us to decide. But I think all of us have work to do, and we need to start doing it now, before anyone else tries to decide for us. because some of the rhetoric coming out of Baku right now is exactly why the Armenian Genocide took place. The pan-Turkic policy of eliminating Armenians and creating the larger Turkish reality is all of a sudden happening again. Aliyevs are talking about it. Jewish writers who are being paid millions of dollars by Baku petrodollars are talking about it in Israel and elsewhere. And we all need to be aware of it. And I think all of us together can do that. I have some questions from the audience. Zare, this is for you. On the issue of repatriation, what's the likelihood of Armenia reaching 5 million people? Because there is an economic exodus based on the low wages that are being paid in Armenia. So I guess the question is, what are some of the reforms that are being made on the socioeconomic aspect of Armenia that is going to stop the emigration and bring people in?
Okay, thanks, Ara. But before I answer that question, I want to go back to the previous issue. Again, I think there's a disconnect, even in the way you, I think, understood what I said. You completely misunderstood what I said. So let's go back to that.
Let's do that.
I never said that genocide recognition was a diasporan issue. I said diaspora perceives it as a strategic issue, whereas for Armenia it's a tactical issue. Diaspora recognition has to be merely one step in establishing justice, a just outcome to this thing that we have going on with Turkey. And that involves homeland, land, territories, population. If for a diasporan, Armenian doing, political activism and engaging in advocacy for the Armenian cause is genocide recognition work, for a person who lives in Armenia, for a young person, that means actually fighting on the fronts of Artsakh war and liberating a part of our homeland, which was lost in the aftermath of the genocide. That's genocide recognition. Liberating part of your homeland, that's genocide recognition. And folks, let's be realistic. The people who fought in that war, with the exception of about 35 people from the diaspora, were from Armenia. Okay? That's genocide recognition. Turkey is so obsessed with Artsakh, not because it loves Azerbaijan so much. At the end of the day, Turkey is a sovereign state separate from Artsakh. If it has to sacrifice Azerbaijan, it will do so like this. But it's not doing that. It's obsessed over this issue because it understands better than many people in the diaspora that what happened in Artsakh, in the minds of many Armenian people, is one step in a long process. And that's why Turkey is so upset and is so principled in its approach to the Artsakh issue. So I'm going back to the issue of, I think people in Armenia, they don't talk with the same lingo and with the same verbiage about genocide recognition. But again, genocide recognition is just one tactical step in a long series of steps that we must undertake as a people in order to achieve our ultimate goals. So now back to this economic issue. Well, how achievable is 5 million by year 2050? I think it's very achievable. But in order for that to happen, obviously we have, I think I alluded to it, but I'll go into more detail. Some things have to happen. Obviously, when you have a corrupt country with no justice system, with no, that doesn't give the sense to its residents that they can become, most that they can become within that Armenian reality, that their children can have a good future in that Armenia, folks are going to leave. And they did so in the last 25 years, 30 years. In terms of the exodus, that exodus has stopped. I'm not aware. I'm quite sure that the balance between folks who are leaving, and the folks who are coming in is a positive balance. So folks are actually, more people are coming in than leaving. But that's, the difference is a drop in the bucket. That's not going to achieve that 5 million by year 2050. We need to, at this point, reform the one branch of government that hasn't been reformed. That's the judiciary, and probably the most important one, because that's the one, final arbiter in what happens not only in folks' daily lives, but also on constitutional issues and so on and so forth. Right now, we have the old judiciary that was appointed by the old regime. The overwhelming majority of those judges have committed heinous crimes against the Armenian people by rubber stamping all the criminal activity that took place, the dispossession of Armenian people of its property by, so-called privatization, by monopolization of the economy, by, I'm sure the thousands of lawsuits that folks lost because some judge got paid off. And today Armenia is struggling in trying to reform its judiciary because these judges just don't want to go. They refuse to go because where are they going to go? Who's going to want them? They're putting up a tough fight. That's the next stage of the revolution, is purging the corrupt judiciary from these old judges that don't know how to be a fair arbiter, to be a fair judge. On top of that, of course, without that, the economy can't really blossom. It can't make the leap that Armenia needs for it to make in order for us to achieve our other goals, which is achieve a very high level of education, so improve the education system, because folks that are coming in, again, they're motivated not so much by what's going to happen to them, but what's going to happen to their children. Also healthcare. Healthcare must reach a minimum standard that is so good where folks would rather live in Armenia and receive healthcare there as opposed to receiving it somewhere else. And it's not that hard to achieve. I mean, realize that in the US, we spend, I think, 14 or 15 times as much money per capita, per person, on healthcare than the next most industrialized nation. And we have the worst healthcare system on the planet. I mean, we're 40th on the list of civilized countries. That's how bad healthcare in the United States is. So what I'm saying is you can qualitatively improve healthcare with not that much expense and provide a system that's better than the US. And I'm not even going to say about the other countries. So these goals, if we achieve these goals, and these goals must be achieved, and that's on our agenda, things are happening one by one. We can't have 5 million people. 5 million is a minimum. It's not that, oh, okay, if we get to 5 million, then we're done. No, we simply have to have at least 5 million people by year 2050 if we are counting on having a long-term homeland and long-term statehood.
Thank you. I see that people are lined up on the microphones. We're going to, I see 4 people. I implore each of you to simply ask a question without pontificating or making large statements. So, Agarian, I'll go with you, and that wasn't necessarily meant for you, but you can listen to that.
You of all people should know that I don't pontificate. I keep my articles fairly short, right, Mr. Editor? What I came up here to say, you guys just bore out in the kind of heated exchange you guys had, in that the issues you're touching on are incredibly important. And I wish some of you were also at the conference last weekend at UCLA, which touched on a lot of these issues, although more from the diaspora end of things. But I think that if we're not careful on what we say, everything you guys said is incredibly easily no, I don't even want to say misinterpreted, misapprehended, misappreciated, misengalvads. So, and I'm saying this because it's not a question. I want a reaction to see if I'm reading this right. And I think the answer lies somewhere in something that Nerses said, exposure, 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 I think.
No question. Next.
Of course, we have to be exposed to each other, and we have to have honest and sincere dialogue, continuous dialogue about these issues. Again, we have to understand one another. And for example, we saw it happen here. You know, I said one thing, I think Ara completely misunderstood what I was saying. And we need to explain to each other what we mean by that and come to a consensus as to a national agenda.
Oh, and sorry, I meant also, the nature of states is changing too, so everything you said here has to be seen, I think, in that really fluid context.
And then one more thing I'll add is that there's really nothing wrong with self-criticism. But you self-correct through self-criticism. Well, the problem that we have in the Armenian culture, diaspora, and there is that we don't like being self-critical. Okay, I don't know, maybe our egos are big and we're, you know, very sort of aggressive people. But fundamentally, self-criticism is part of the discourse as well. Whether, you know, and that's what leads to self-correction, and that is also something that we're being able to include in our broader narrative.
And I think that's an important thing, Zare. You and I spoke about it in our interview the other day, that I think this discussion needs to happen, or the self-criticism needs to happen sooner rather than later, because there are certain elements that think that their way is the right way, and this kind of, it's also part of the, I guess, Armenian identity, this righteousness, that we need to put that righteousness on the table and just hammer it out so we can come up with a solution. I'll be fair and go to the other side of the room.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Rafael. Thank you panelists for the interesting discussion. So my question is related to a notion that Andrenik brought up. To add on the importance of having an increase in population growth for economic growth and solving the national issue, wouldn't it be more beneficial for the country if we would rather focus on the matter of how to make Armenia more attractive for the diaspora to bring them back, instead of accepting the notion of permanent diaspora? Thank you.
Who's the question for?
You're directing it to me?
Anyone?
This is another one of these ands rather than either or. Of course, we need to work hard to make Armenia more attractive to the diaspora, both as a tourist destination as well as a permanent place to relocate and repatriate. Absolutely. I'm not arguing against repatriation, but honestly, in today's globalized environment, nation states cannot go it alone. You know, if at one time, 100 years ago, during the epoch of the nation state, you know, leaders could entertain this illusion that they could go it alone, we have to wake up and realize that no nation state can successfully go it alone. It needs to find its way into the international information highway. It needs to find its way into a globalized economy where there are flows going in both directions. For that, the diaspora is an enormous asset. And rather than treating the diaspora somehow a liability or a temporary phenomenon or something that is there as a cushion, but ultimately we all go back to Armenia, we need an integrated view that says, you know what, there is an Armenia, it's at the center of our existence, but we are a transnation, a globalized network with antennae found everywhere around the globe. So I don't dispute what you say. Absolutely, Armenia has to make itself more attractive, and we have to help it become more attractive for diasporans to exchange, to invest, or to actually repatriate. But that doesn't mean the diaspora itself should not remain permanent. It should.
Can I add something to that? So I don't claim authorship of this concept, but I sort of constantly talking about this. Maybe someone else talked about it. I'm more concerned with psychological repatriation than physical repatriation. So what's psychological repatriation according to me? Any person who accepts the possibility of ever living in the homeland is already ready. They're psychologically repatriated. It's just a matter of the right circumstances at the right time in their life, in their particular, life that will cause the physical repatriation. But how do you achieve that psychological repatriation on a massive scale, which will result in a portion of them actually physically repatriating at some point. And again, this goes back to the idea of how do you save the diaspora? How do you make it stronger? Today, we're constantly hearing stories about how in this community, that community, folks are assimilating, or they're not speaking Armenian anymore, the schools are shutting down, the language is being lost. And the question is why? So why is it happening? Other than the fact that in the old, sort of the classic Middle Eastern diaspora, Armenians existed in an insular society within the broader Islamic society, or with the exception of Lebanon, of course. Yes, that's true, and that did help maintain the Armenian identity in a very almost cocoonish kind of a way. And that's not the case because the Middle Eastern communities are depleted, some are destroyed. And in the Western world, with open societies, with liberal societies, the Armenians don't have those dividing religious, cultural, civilizational rights that they used to, and therefore it's easier to assimilate. But there's more to it than that. Other people have lived in those open societies for long periods of time, and they seem to not have any tendency to assimilate. And for example, Jews living in the United States or in the Western world, they still retain their strong identity. I think the key is creating that strong, powerful, attractive brand that is Armenia. Something that young people, especially young people, because they're the ones posing these problems for us today, they can identify with. They can take ownership of it and say, you know what, yeah, I'm Armenian. Because in the back of their mind, they understand that being Armenian is associated with a broader concept of Armenia, and that Armenia is well known as a cool place where people live free, people don't want to abandon, don't want to leave, where you can have great education, good health care, you can have a job, you can start a business, you can enjoy yourself, you have modern and progressive technologies. That's the kind of brand that you want to create. And that's the only way you can tie these kids to their homeland. You can't beat them into submission. You can't force them to be Armenians. You have to simply give them something that's attractive enough for them to cling on to and not want to give up.
Antranik?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to one aspect of your comments. Some brilliant insights, by the way. One point that you left open that I think we should delve into more is how to keep the community vibrant here in ways that connect us globally, and especially connect us to Armenia. I wrote about this last month in the Armenian Weekly. I invite you to check it out. I talked, in part of that article, I talked about how we retain and cultivate our youth in the Armenian American reality. I've been involved for now 30, 40 years in the community in New York, New Jersey. And I have to say, I have some insight. One is that we're very good at shepherding youth until they reach college age. Okay. Our Armenian schools are often good daycare services. Our youth organizations and scouting groups and children's dance groups and children's choirs are great for inculcating Armenian identity in kids. But then these kids grow up, and we have trouble growing up with them in the traditional model. Because the traditional model, in my view, doesn't fully grow with these kids as they become adults. As they become adults, their interests diversify. Some take interest in law, other in engineering, other in environmental concerns. And our traditional diasporan structures haven't been very good at absorbing all that diversity. Yeah, we have political parties, we have church boards, we have the Haitad movement, which is certainly a plus in attracting young people. But the best way to attract people is to tie into their livelihoods, to tie into their career paths, to tie into how they're developing 9 to 5. Okay? And for that, Armenia is by far the biggest weapon that we have, right? If you're an environmentalist, go to Armenia and visit Terut or Kacharan or Amulsar. Okay? If you're into IT, you just had the WCIT conference that is evidently opening doors to new investment opportunities and new job creation in Armenia. Armenia has a wealth of places where you can cut your teeth professionally. And so your involvement with Armenia, in a sense, will maintain your Armenian identity, will, in a sense, manufacture good Armenians well beyond their college years, into their adulthood. That's what we need.
I think it's actually bringing, to take people out of those like localized states that you're saying that localized, we keep them until a certain age, is to bring the ability to share experiences with whatever's happening in Armenia, like whether that's through a company, but to bring the ability to do business with businesses in Armenia, to do things that are being done in Armenia, to spend time here with actual people, to bring those big ideas down to a very micro level. It's just to create the opportunities to interact and experience and work together.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi there, I'm Joe Hakobian from Armenia 360. We're involved in putting Armenia on Google Street View. My question is for Dr. Kopalian and Mr. Taron. So the question goes, most of media today doesn't happen on a TV, it happens on one of these. And the Armenian community, short of normal social media like Facebook and Twitter, I don't really see leadership. Well, in the transport sector maybe, but there was a question that you were addressing, Dr. Kasparian, about engaging with the youth and in all of their disparate interests. So my question is, what role can technology play, and how can we catalyze that with apps, with networks, with new commerce strategies to link these two different realities, the diasporan reality, the Western diasporan reality that I come from, and the actual on-the-ground reality in Armenia, which we've experienced in all of our mapping work. There is quite a divide. How can technology bridge that?
Yeah, that's actually awesome. Because through like the revolution, we saw how big of a role Facebook played, and I think this is the first time any kind of medium was actually such a crucial role in a regime change. So this creates an opportunity to create a new type of platform that ties, that's kind of at a country level. And Serge Tankian and Alexis Ohanian mentioned they're working on a platform called High Connect, which is a social platform that ties businesses together, because it also ties, like I don't know what an Armenian in France is doing or what their capabilities are, and I want to connect. Like if I need to, if someone needs to do somewhere in IT, they post on Facebook, hey, does anyone know this? Or hey, Taron, do you know this? So it's done through this social media platform that's not made for it. So one is to completely make a new one that's born out of a country level for the country and for the culture. So localized social platforms that give the ability to create mini localizations and business connections.
Just after that, aside from monetary and business variables, there's a concept called digital citizenship. Okay, there's a concept utilized in political science to understand sort of political and social activism of individuals who do so digitally, as you posed the question, through apps, social media, and so on and so forth. We have not seen the level of digital citizenship activism we'd like to see from diaspora youth, okay, in Armenia, whereas, as Taron brought up, we saw it extensively by the Armenian youth during the Velvet Revolution. So one mechanism of having more diaspora youth involved in the politics of Armenia, in the cultural discourse in Armenia, so on and so forth, is to promote the notion of digital citizenship that's not exclusive to Armenia, but rather to the broader thing, the Armenian nation. So this very notion of digital citizenship could, to a large extent, address a lot of the questions that you're posing. It needs to be developed in a way where it's conducive and it creates an incentive for diasporan youth to engage.
Yeah, and through this, actually, instead of like the social aspect as well, in addition to the social aspect, you can have a way for as a digital citizen to participate in creating projects there and funding projects there that traditionally is like through Armenia Fund or through donating. But one way to tie diaspora and Armenia is co-creation of projects. Like my project at Nourish was creating a token, an energy token with which the diasporan would buy it, and with that token, they would essentially buy a little space on a solar panel that would be installed in Armenia. So you would invest in Armenia, make money, and we would be able to put free panels there and create a microgrid. So getting them involved monetarily as well socially.
Thank you. Go ahead. I just have to let all of you know that the organizers are telling me that I have to close up shop by 6 o'clock. There's 2 minutes left. I'm going to not ignore the organizers, but amend that to another 5 to 7 minutes. So please go ahead and ask your question.
It was mentioned that Armenia's immigration outflow rate has stopped. My question is the birth rate still negative, or is that also leveling off? The internal birth rate.
Arman, I'm not sure I know the answer to that question. I don't know that the birth rate is negative in Armenia. I just don't think it's enough. It doesn't provide for growth.
Based on past government statistics, I think for some time it has been negative.
It's negative. So I don't have any statistics to suggest that the birth rate has changed. I mean, I hope the revolution has excited our young people in there. Not knowing the facts.
Okay, the last question.
On a more serious note, there is active struggle to stop this epidemic of aborting female fetuses. That's an abomination. It's a crime against our people, and we should all engage in that and make sure that does not happen. And the government is working on that.
Final question.
Is there a well-defined plan regarding the participation of the diaspora in the educational, political, scientific, even be a deputy minister of any ministry, or deputy to the governor of Gyumri or Vanadzor or anywhere, by which this will be an encouragement so that the participation should be actual. We cannot just talk about participation without actually putting a plan where the diaspora will have something to say in different departments in the education, in schools, for example. A deputy principal can be a diaspora person, but but those persons should be experienced and qualified. So do you have such plan, or can you discuss this issue so that the parliament can bring a law regarding that type of participation, actual participation?
Thank you.
So there's no clear, defined plan. What there is the desire for something like this to happen, and there's the political will. We have in our plans an entire set of laws that need to be reformed in order to remove the impediments legal impediments that exist in Armenia to implementing this kind of thing. Why do they have to be deputy anything? Why shouldn't they be the position? Why do the diasporans have to be in secondary positions? If you're the best qualified candidate and politics doesn't get in the way, there's always politics, right? But politics is politics. If you're the most qualified candidate for a position, you should be serving in that position no matter where you're from. And that should be the logic through which we guide ourselves for the sake of good governance, for the sake of bringing about that Armenia that we're all hoping to have. Now, we have the law on the civil service, which has very problematic clauses in it that makes it impossible for diasporans to be hired in the civil service sector. We have laws, I think we have a clause in the Constitution which makes it impossible for a diasporan to run for office unless they've lived there for, I believe it's 4 years. And that law is problematic. Again, if we're going to encourage millions of people to come in, we're going to get them to come in, and they come in with Armenian citizenship, which should afford equal rights to every Armenian citizen who resides in Armenia. Why should they have to wait for 4 years before they run for office or they're appointed as minister? Currently, a minister cannot be appointed from the diaspora unless they have resided in Armenia for that time period. Again, makes no sense. In our reality, it's a problematic law that needs to be removed, because if they're the best candidate, we need good people, they need to be appointed. But more than that, I think there is a bit of a cultural problem in Armenia where, you know, especially Yerevansis, they think they know everything.
Hey, take it easy on the Yerevansis.
Hey, this is coming from Yerevansis, so I can say it. And that's, you know, it's a bit of a problem. And that creates sort of a deeper psychological reluctance to have others come from the outside and actually offer help. So we need to, again, going back to the issue of educating our children better and making them aware of the diaspora, making them, filling them with positive impulses and positive energy and love towards their brothers and sisters that reside outside of Armenia is something that we have to do in order to achieve this goal and many other goals. But we will be pushing for changes in laws, and we will be pushing for ways to engage diasporans in especially governmental structures. I'll tell you that our structure, obviously, the top 2 people are from the diaspora. So it's already happened. I heard that one of the other diasporans who had been living in Armenia for a while and was heading I guess the best translation would be the assessor's office, the head of the cadastre, has resigned. So we're losing one diasporan from the government. I don't know what the story is there, but we have 1 minus. We need to add way more, and I know for a fact the Prime Minister wants to do that and is looking for the ways to do it.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on this panel.
Very good. Thank you. Very good.
As I said, hopefully this is a beginning of a larger discussion that all of us will be taking part in, because at the end of the day, it's our nation, it's our homeland, and we all have a stake in it. And if the revolution was not enough of a spark for you to roll up your sleeves and work, there's a lot of work to be done, and all of us have to do it. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much to all of our distinguished panelists for such an engaging conversation. As a token of our appreciation, we do have a parting gift for all of you. So thank you very much.